My name is Carolyn Strobel. I'm the Director of Thought into Action, Colgate's Entrepreneurship Program. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, part of the Career Discovery Series. Today's event is sponsored by the Colgate Professional Networks and Career Services as an introduction to the world of startups. For those who aren't familiar with the professional networks, they were created to provide opportunities for alumni and parents to connect and network with each other and to engage with students who are interested in pursuing related careers. Hence this event and this summer series. Throughout the series this summer, we'll be highlighting many different industries as a way for students and alumni to connect and discuss professional opportunities. I encourage you all to attend more than just the one today. I believe we're doing 2 per week. Our plan for today is to spend about 20 to 30 minutes talking about startups, and then we'll use the remaining 15 minutes or so for Q&A. We have 45 minutes allotted for the webinar, but we are able to extend to an hour. So if the conversation is going really well, please feel free to ask whatever questions are on your mind and don't feel bad. We have to cut it off right at the 45-minute mark. For now, I have everyone on mute. If you do have a question or you need any help at all during the presentation, feel free to just put your question in the chat. You can direct that to everyone, or you can direct that to myself or to Chelsea Lehman, who is has been organizing all of these events for Career Services. I'm just going to, all right, perfect. Gonna make sure, okay. So with that, I think we are ready to dive in. Oh, one thing I will say, just for a couple more Zoom things, I'm going to be changing the views. I'll change it to speaker view right now. I'm gonna try to spotlight whoever's speaking so that it's easy to see on your screen. And then during Q&A, I'll probably take us into gallery mode. That said, you should be able to also switch probably between gallery and speaker view. So obviously you all know Zoom by now, but just to let you know, to help you orient yourselves during this session. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. In order of class year, we have Ben Ross, class of 2005, Amulya Uppala, class of 2015, and Matthew Glick, class of 2019. I'd like to start out by having each of our 3 panelists talk a little bit about their journey since Colgate. And we can go in class your order. So Ben, we can start with you.
So it was a pretty interesting journey for me. I left Colgate. I was not pursuing what I got my degree in, which was Native American Studies. I was a jazz singer. And then I got married at age 25, so I had to get a job. Fell into technical recruiting, and I started working with a lot of big banks, selling technology talent into these organizations. And after about 3 years, realized I didn't really love sales, and I was much more curious in building tech. So kind of 3 years into building a good business, I stopped doing it, and I created a software company that was doing machine learning, and I guess people now call it AI, back in 2010 into 2011. Made a bunch of mistakes, failed in pretty much every way they describe not to fail in the lean startup, and shut that business down in 2015-ish. Worked at a quant hedge fund where I helped transform their technology from a bunch of really bad technology to modern cloud services. And along the way, I've consulted with a lot of startups, mostly Series B, sometimes large Series A, and occasionally early seed rounds on early team formation, executive coaching, helping them with things like agile coaching and the like. And I've gotten to see a lot of different kinds of companies and kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amulya. I graduated in 2015, and I majored in peace and conflict studies. Right after Colgate, I moved to New York City and was working at a content data analytics startup called SimpleReach that was later acquired. From there, I moved to a D2C brand called Glossier, which is a beauty and skincare brand. And I had a foot in both product and brand marketing there. I started as the 40th employee, left when it was about 250, and now I live in the Bay Area and work at Asana, which is a very like Silicon Valley tech company. It's a work collaboration software company. I manage international go-to-market strategy and campaigns. When I joined, we were about 200, and now I think we just hit our 1,000th employee maybe yesterday. So have kind of been through the scaling of startups.
All right, I'm Matthew. My story post-Colgate is not a long one. I graduated in 2019. I played men's soccer at Colgate and was also a peace and conflict studies major. And while at Colgate, I started a company called Gipper, which is a marketing technology platform that makes graphic design incredibly easy for non-designers. So I started that company at Colgate through Thought into Action. Well, it was a totally different business when I started. So thanks to Thought into Action, I was able to transition to full-time after graduation. I moved to New York City. We raised a round of funding right after my graduation. We have a team of 8 right now. We're focused primarily in education, and we have over 250 schools in over 35 states who use our platform to create great marketing content, primarily for their social channels. And that's about it. Stuck in my New York City apartment during COVID. I'm still working on Gipper virtually, of course.
You know, one of the things that always strikes me when speaking to alumni and others who work at startups is just how different everyone's experiences are based on their paths, you know, throughout their careers since college, the type of work that they're doing, the types and the size of the companies that they're at. I mean, it can look very different depending on what size company you're at, what stage company you're at, and what your specific area of expertise is. Yet at the same time, there are some similarities about being part of a small, you know, collaborative team with a fast approach, you know, just really innovating and doing new things. I'd love to have each of you talk a little bit about, you know, help us paint a picture of what it's like to work at a startup. From your experience, what are the pros and cons about being at a startup? And how might that experience be different based on the size, the stage, or the culture of a specific company?
I guess I can start. I only have really experience with my own startup, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But you know, I started Gipper with pretty much just myself, and we've now grown the team to 8, and we're, you know, hiring as we speak. The environment at that stage, when you're, you know, the first employee, maybe you're a co-founder, whatever it may be, is very different than a Series B startup that's just raised, you know, $35 million and is hiring tons and tons of people. At my stage, you're kind of in, like, it feels like a blender almost. There's tons of stuff going on. There's new problems every single, it seems like, hour. There's responsibilities in terms of your role that your role's responsibilities are changing all the time. So you need a ton of flexibility. You need to be able to do a ton of different things really well. And you need to be open to the fact that things are fluid and changing in real time. I did actually kind of have an office within another much larger startup, and just noticed in that environment, the structure is way different. There's much more structure. And so I think, you know, the other panelists will talk a little bit about the different types of startups you can join, but when you're starting at the very early stage, or if you're looking at joining a company that's, you know, less than 10 people, just know that that's going to be a totally different experience than joining a company that you know, a startup that has 50 to 100 or over 100 people.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear Amulya's perspective on going from the 50 to 200 plus or 1,000 plus, because most of what I've done is literally from 1 to 100, and then from multiple thousands trying to build innovation in a large company.
Yeah, I think that something I've learned a lot about as I've kind of been in these startups and seen things really grow and change is that it's really important to find your niche. So there are a lot of people who love being the creator or being at that ideation stage of a startup. And when you're at that stage, usually under 50, maybe even like the first 10 employees, it's a lot about how can you take this idea and make it a reality, and what are the things that you're learning that are and are not working from the very beginning, and who are the people that you need to hire, because what are the skills you're realizing you need to make this a success. And then you kind of get into the people who are the builders, and those are the people who join early on but maybe aren't in the first 10 employees, and they are people who start to implement different channels and different processes and kind of create teams in this company. And then I've kind of find my niche in this scaling, where I love taking a startup to a company and building out processes and structures and kind of having things like revenue goals and really structured things I'm working towards. And those are just, depending on what you like, you figure that out. But it's very different experiences. So if you're someone who thrives in adapting and kind of being in an environment where everything is a little bit up in there and you just need to figure it out, you'll probably like the first two. If you're someone who wants to come in and really put something into place that's going to take it to a new level, you might like the scaling part of it. But all three, I mean, you can't have, like, all three are needed for a company to succeed at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, you nailed it, because when you're at the early phase of the company, you're trying to find product market fit. And finding product market fit is entirely based on what are your customers telling you, what is the evidence telling you, and you can't be somebody who's territorial, right? It's literally, you're all CEOs, you're all architects, you're all janitors. And if you don't have that mentality, sorry, there's my cat. You don't have that mentality in the first, when you're at a company like that, you won't have the strength of character to speak when you know the truth about something. And one of the most important things that startups can and should have is kind of radical transparency and idea meritocracies, because when you're early stage, you're literally fighting for survival every moment of the day. And so that could mean as early and as often being honest. And that comes from having leadership that is supportive and kind of creates that psychological safety. And it's not to say you can't start at one phase and move to another. Like when I started, I was CEO of my own company and I sucked at that. And then I got slightly better at operating and I started being an advisor to C-levels at other startups that were scaling. And you will evolve as you go through your career. And the beauty of startups is it's the fastest way that you can show that you're able to learn things and, you know, make decisions under duress, because you're always going to make a mistake. You just don't want to make the one that's going to be the existential threat.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the different types of roles, you know, beyond just being a generalist and having a hand in everything, but, you know, if a student is looking at an internship or a job at a startup that's at a point where they have different departments, they may be looking for marketers, product managers, you know, business development, those types of things. What are the types of roles that exist, and how might a student go about making heads or tails of those opportunities and figure out what might be a good fit for them?
So I'll start with that one. I think the first kind of, if you think about your logic tree, the first big piece is this a B2C company or is it a B2B company? Because a B2C company has very different requirements on how they determine product market fit, how they do their revenue generation, how they do their operations, whereas a B2C company has a more traditional enterprise style engagement. So, you know, B2C companies won't often have customer success managers. They'll have a community manager, because it's the idea of one to many, whereas in the enterprise, the idea is it's a one-to-one relationship. Often in B2C, your chief revenue officer or your chief product officer or your CMO are kind of the same person, whereas in a B2B company, it's a very different person. And what you'll find is that there's more specialization within B2B startups than there is, at least in my experience, for B2C. And, you know, I think that there's this whole exercise you can do to go, if you like product, you need to understand things like user experience and usability and high-level design. Doesn't mean pixel perfect, but it means you have to understand how someone interacts with an interface. Whereas a salesperson at a B2B has to understand sales operations and follow a large sales process. So I think first and foremost, it's the, you know, thinking one-to-one or one-to-many.
I can speak to it from the the marketing and creative side. So a lot of the roles I think at startups are tricky because titles can really mean a lot of things at startups and sometimes they don't mean anything. And it's just an ambiguity that you kind of accept by working in those types of companies. But something that I always say is looking at, if you're interested in something like marketing, you're interested in something like creative production, or maybe you want to go work at a physical product versus a tech company. Those are important things to think about. And so a lot of times how people get started, at least in marketing, is if you take on anything that deals with content. So anything that deals with content coordinators, anything that deals with messaging or positioning, those are skills that can take you really far. I was someone who went from working at a beauty brand to working at a tech company. And the reason that I got that job was because what I sold myself on was my messaging and positioning skills, which were something that I developed when I was at Colgate because my education was so writing focused. And so even if you're not someone who can speak engineering or speak product, you have the skills for someone to take a chance on you. And I think it's important to kind of what Ben was saying, recognizing that the company's at a point where it can take a chance on you. And also finding those kind of key things that you can bring there. So if you're interested in something like user experience, then that's like a lot of people have rotational programs. A lot of people have rotational programs for product managers, product marketing managers. There's always a good place to start. And then also just looking at kind of the roles that feel a little bit ambiguous are probably the ones that will be hiring people who are like looking to start out.
Yeah. I was just going to say, if you're at the starting point and you're at this, or if you're listening and just wondering or thinking to yourself, I have no idea what I want to do or what roles would be a good fit for me, I think maybe the first step or a helpful step could be reaching out to Colgate alums. There's plenty of Colgate alum founders in lots of different stages. Look for, go to their websites, look at their hiring, look at the roles they're hiring for, reach out. I think as a Colgate student, you are positioned perfectly to have these conversations in a way that's totally natural, and an opportunity for you to learn about these different roles, the different responsibilities, what you should be doing now in order to position yourself or put yourself in a good place to be hired. You're only at Colgate for 4 years, or most people are at Colgate for 4 years. So take advantage of that opportunity and reach out to people so you can start to figure out a little bit more, where your passions are and where you could be, useful to certain companies.
And I think there are certain prerequisite skills that regardless of the path you choose are helpful, right? Like every single startup, whether you're in business development, marketing, product, it's helpful to be able to do some level of data management, right? Like at least Excel, even better if you have experience with things like SQL and or Python, because ultimately people have gotten very much away from gut instinct, and it's so much around what kind of user testing have we done? Do we understand? Are there kind of KPIs for when we make assumptions, right? Like startups are very much into following the scientific method. Have an experiment, define your parameters, run the experiment, collect as much data, and iterate as quickly as possible, because it doesn't matter how large or small you are, you've got to figure out how to make as much money out of an idea or some sort of process. And the only way that you can measure is if you have some measurements in place. And so, the more skills like that you can develop as early in your career, it just gives you so much more flexibility.
Speaking of skills, what advice would you have for students who are, about how to articulate their skills and value that they bring? I know that, for a student who's looking at an internship or a first job out of college, it can often be hard to know, well, how do I even go about positioning myself well for one of these types of roles?
I can take that. I think that it's hard when you're looking at internships and entry-level jobs. But one of the biggest skills that you can bring and mention in interviews is that you're passionate about finding solutions and also being able to adapt to any environment you're thrown into. I think that people are really always looking for that, no matter what kind of startup you're at and no matter what their product or mission is. And so if you're someone who can come into an interview and say, yeah, I may have just graduated from college, but I can adapt really quickly to any situation. I'm like willing to put the time in to learn the tools that you use. And I can go from, I can work really well with people, right? So you can say, I'm pretty sure that I can go from a meeting that's something about tactical problem solving to a multi-person cross-functional brainstorm to helping you review and put together something you're going to show to C-level executives. Those are 3 types of meetings that I have every day. And whenever I hire someone for my team, it's really important to me that they can go feel comfortable in any of those types of settings, because I can teach them the tools and the skills that they need, but I can't teach them those people relationships. And it's easier if you already come in knowing that that's something that you'll be able to give to that team.
Yeah, just to go off. Go ahead, man.
Sorry, what I was going to piggyback on is passion, right? Like Amulya mentioned, passion and problem solving. Passion and problem solving are kind of the 2 most important things for me when you're early, because if you can't solve problems, it means I have to give you specific tasks, right? Like ultimately, I don't want to work in an organization where they're prescribing this is what you need to do and when. I want them to say this is the outcome we need and figure it out and come to me with a plan. And then you have to be passionate enough about anything, right? Like I don't care if it's golf, if it's stamp collecting, if it's, fashion. If you don't have a passion for something, I'm going to be hard pressed to see if I can get the best out of you. And just because you don't have a professional record doesn't mean you can't demonstrate it in other things. Like Google is very big on behavioral interviews. And so you could say, well, for Matt, being a Division I athlete, that shows an incredible work ethic and incredible passion, because I know the two-a-days and getting through, like, there's a million things he could have said to me that would have shown me he's the kind of person that's committed to change and hard work and, has some leadership skills. So like, I'm sure you all have elements of things that you've done in your personal life, your professional life, whether it's, fraternity and sorority, or it's a social club or volunteering, and, being able to show, this is what I did, this is how I approached it, these were my thoughts. That's super valuable, because when you're early in your career, nobody's had any real corporate accomplishments, right? Unless you're Elon Musk or some genius that built a business at 14.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, passion is so big. Like, when I'm talking to someone, I want to see their the whole body light up and be super fired up about something. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to my company, but maybe it's in a similar field, or just something that shows that they're energized, that they get up in the morning and are like fired up and ready to go. That's the type of person that I want sitting next to me or on a Zoom call in this COVID-19 world. That is like going to energize the team and make sure that everyone's positive and uplifted and working hard. Like, those are the intangibles that are super important. And then in saying that, if you have a passion, hopefully you've done something around it, which I think is really helpful. So it's not just, I love stamp collecting. It's like, I've created this whole website around stamp collecting, and I have this community that I've built and a whole forum. Like, it doesn't have to be something that you're doing in college to make money necessarily. It could just be something that you're doing because you love the space or you love the specific thing. And then when you come to an interview and you talk about that as someone who runs a startup, like, I already know that you've gone through all these, you've solved problems, you've thought about strategy, you've just done a bunch of different things. And that to me is really important, because it's not just the fact that you say, look, like, I love this one thing. It's that you've actually taken the next step and done something about it, which I think is indicative of someone that I would want on my team.
I think something I would add to what Matt and Ben said is that when I'm interviewing someone, no matter what level I'm interviewing them for, something I look for is even if it's not a correct understanding of the field, I look for that they did their research and that they know something about the competitors, the industry, that they just took the time. And I think that it sounds so simple, but it makes such a big difference when you're interviewing someone that they did that research and brought it in, because it means that they're actually excited about the product. So when I interview people at Asana now, I ask them, what do you think about our competitors, or what have we done that you could improve? And that takes research, and that takes looking through a company's website and looking at a campaign they've done recently, or a product launch, or something, a press release. And it doesn't need to be any of those. It could be anything that we've done, but I just want to know that you looked at something and you thought about it and you're like, I have this idea that would help improve, because I'm not looking for people who are like me. I'm looking for people who can think unlike me to solve the problems that I'm not seeing. And that applies anywhere. When I was at Glossier and I was really young on the team, I would sit in interviews and I would watch people who would talk about other beauty brands, but also other D2C brands. So it didn't necessarily need to be a direct competitor. It would just be someone in that similar space with maybe a similar audience doing something really innovative and that was resonating, that we would want to think about.
Yeah, it takes like less than 30 minutes probably. I mean, hopefully you put in more time, but it's literally that simple. And if you can't take the time to go to our website, to look at my LinkedIn, to do like a little bit of research, why should I care about you? Why should I have you on my team? So I think that's so important. And just another thing is someone who's willing to learn, is not like closed-minded, someone who's open-minded. At Gipper, we always talk about the best ideas coming to the forefront. Where, like, if I say something and someone else on our team has a better idea, like, that's something that we want to see. So we don't want someone who's totally like wedded to their ideas, who's going to be a bad teammate. I know it's kind of like a sports example, but we want someone who's going to be a great team member. And that means that they're, okay saying, I was wrong, or this idea wasn't the best idea. That's another, I think, key quality. Like, you can definitely be confident, you want to be confident, but you also want to have you want to be humble at the same time. And that's like a key personality trait that I would look for when hiring anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that, like the most direct way I say this often to CEOs is, are you greedy or egotistical, right? Where are you on that continuum? And when I say greed, it's kind of collective greed, right? Is the team winning? Are we getting the right outcome? Is the business going to thrive? And if their desire is that culture, you have a pretty clear incentive structure, right? Where everybody can kind of orient to what does success look like for the company. Whereas if you have a lot of senior people and there's a lot of egos because they've accomplished a lot, it can be very hard to succeed in that culture. So I'm always very quick to, and this brings me to another really important point is it's okay for you to ask tough questions of somebody, right? Like I remember one of the best interviews I was in was somebody basically grilled me on all the reasons why they should work for me and why our hedge fund was poised to do great things. And after that hour, I said, holy crap, through the questions she asked me, it's clear she thought about herself in the job. She thought about other companies that do what we do. She was specifically asking how I was going to manage her, how I was going to give her responsibility. Like it was like 10 questions she asked me and we spent an hour and a half and I literally made her an offer on the spot for a good amount of money. So don't be afraid to, this is a two-way street, right? You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you.
Before we jump to Q&A, I want to ask one final question about resources and research. For the students on the call, I know you've already heard some industry speak. Hopefully, whether you're familiar with these terms or not, D2C, direct to consumer, B2B, business to business, B2C, business to consumer. So, there is a unique language in the startup world, and that's something that you have to be prepared for when you're talking to somebody who's in the industry and when you're interviewing. To our panelists, what resources would you recommend to students? What types of research would you recommend that they do so that they can go into conversations with people in the industry in a informed manner?
I can talk about one thing that, this is just my personal recommendation, but I'm a huge Twitter fan. And I think if you can find some people in your space or anything they're interested in and just follow them and see the conversations they're engaging with, that's a good way to just be exposed to some of this language and also to stay up to date. Another important thing is just, I have said it before, is just reaching out to people and having conversations in environments where you can ask questions. And that's also another thing about, I don't want someone who necessarily has all the answers. No one has all the answers. I certainly don't. So being able to ask, what could you explain what B2B actually means? Like, that's okay. That's not, especially as a student, like that's not a stupid question. It may be a stupid question if you're 5 years into working at a startup, but it's different when you're a junior at Colgate University, right? So don't be afraid to ask questions. It's better now than, 4 years from now.
Something that I also, I think all three of us will probably say that we are Twitter people. But something that I also love is I love finding newsletters that really kind of explore spaces I'm interested in. So there's a newsletter that I love that I always tell people about by this woman named Saria Zolt, and it's called Check Your Pulse. And every week she sends out a newsletter about products that she's passionate about. And it doesn't even matter if they have even hired a team yet. She could have just come across this idea someone was pitching and she'll put it down. And I found that a really good way for me to describe what impacts the work that I do is that I look for products that are as interesting to me as the one that I'm working at. So I think that that's really important, that you're probably interested in some sort of space, or you use some sort of product that you're already interested in. Like, just take that as a starting point and start your research. And from there you will find the resources. And then when you're talking to people like Colgate alumni, or if you're in an interview with someone, even if it's informational, you should always feel free to be like, what does that mean in lay people terms, right? Because startup people have a tendency, myself included, to start talking in these complex terms that don't actually mean anything than like a very simple phrase. So sometimes I was in a meeting right before this where I was throwing around the terms like OKRs, which doesn't actually mean anything other than like the goals you're trying to hit. But that's a very complex startup term that you would never know if you were a sophomore, junior, or senior in college, because why would you come across that?
Yeah, companies pay me to help them introduce OKRs.
See?
But no, so for me, like, I often start with TechCrunch because it's easy reading and it really covers a lot of the issues, the bi-coastal issues. It's definitely mostly California, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and New York centric, but there is some Boston stuff. And it's a quick way for me to like literally sound smart for 3 minutes about what's going on in tech. And then from TechCrunch, I will then spider into Twitter if I want to get involved in a conversation. LinkedIn is obviously a very important tool for networking, and it's turning into a content engine. And I would say those are kind of and the fourth is Crunchbase, right? Because what's the first thing that happens after somebody raises a round? There are usually two things. One is hire a lot of people, and the second is spend a bunch of money on marketing. And so, you know, especially as a job seeker, I think Crunchbase is a fantastic way. And then, you know, you kind of have to have your own tracking mechanism because there aren't any great tools out there where you could go, here is, and it's why I built my first search engine. It was literally for you answer 13 questions to tell me about you, your goals, your passion, your aspirations. Maybe you want to go from marketing to product. And we would use our personalization algo to show you every company that fit your culture, had raised enough money and make predictions on, you know, an exit. But it failed because I didn't know how to turn that into real paying customers. Cool product, not a business.
All right. Well, I'd like to open it up to questions. I'm going to take us into gallery mode right now. I'm going to give everyone the ability to unmute themselves. And so for the students on the call, if you just want to jump in with a question that you have, now's the time to do it. All right, I see a hand. Zach.
So yes, I'm Zach Duffy. I'm a rising sophomore. And so I guess this question is intended for Matt Glick, but if anyone can answer it as well. But I'm just curious. So, you know, you said that you started your company right out of Colgate and you worked with the, I forget the name of it, but the, you know, program here to get your idea going. I'm just curious, like, what made you decide to do that? And you know, was it kind of like a difficult decision? Obviously it's a lot of risk and you know, it seemed like it turned out great for you, but kind of like the process of coming to that, you know, decision. And
Yeah. So in terms of the idea of going full time, like that was always in the back of my head when I was working on Gipper at Colgate. Like I said, I really came into Colgate with an idea that was totally different than what it is today. I joined Thought into Action, which is one of the best decisions of my life. No one's paying me to say that, I promise. Like, that's the honest truth. Even if you don't go full time, like, it will change your life, because if you take advantage of it, it will expose you to a ton of amazing mentors, whether they're parent, alumni, community members. So that was like a huge step. And I knew that if I built the business to a certain level where we could raise money after graduation, then, you know, it would make sense to go full time. Like it would, I mean, I knew that if I didn't go full time, it would be very hard for the business to succeed. Luckily, we were able to raise the money thanks to a lot of the help through, you know, the Thought into Action program and being exposed to investors and mentors and things like that. And also there's the lowest risk now versus, I mean, it's the lowest risk now because I don't have a family, right? I don't have to support an entire family. Most people are joining companies that they're probably not going to be at in a few years. And for me, it was kind of a no-brainer at that point. So I'm not sure, was there another part of the question?
I was just kind of curious about you know, like if you could elaborate a little more on your decision, but yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah. So it was just making sure that the business was at a stage where we could raise money to support going full time. So that was the biggest thing. And once we could do that, like I said, it was really a no-brainer because the least risk and the biggest upside in my opinion.
I see. And was it, you know, so yeah, so it wasn't a lot of risk. You didn't have a family, but was it, you know, like were your parents, like, were you planning on starting your own business when you entered Colgate, or was it kind of something that, like, you know, you came up upon, or I don't know.
Yeah. So I definitely thought, actually, when I was a freshman and first started Gipper, I thought I was going to drop out from the roaring success of what the business was initially. That didn't happen. So it definitely was on my mind. My family was definitely supportive, which was great. I have a very good friend who also went full time with the business he started after school, and his family was not so supportive. They wanted him to go to medical school. He was my roommate, and I convinced him to join TIA and not go to medical school, even though he did the pre-med track. And through hard work, his parents are now very happy that he decided to go full time. So I was in a position where I was lucky that I had parents who were, you know, supporting me. Not everyone has that situation, and that's okay. And you can definitely be successful. If you want to talk about it, you can definitely reach out to me. I'm sure they'll provide my contact information, so I'm happy to talk you through it. But Luckily for me, I was in a situation where I was in an environment where going full-time was, it really wasn't that difficult for me.
Cool.
I mean, I would agree with Matt. Like every single person I've known, there's often the valley of despair when you're in a certain age. Then the people that I see that have sustained success, it's usually they're either really early or they're kind of later. And I picked a really interesting time, right? Suddenly I was making money and I was 29 years old. And God, I wish I had done it while I was young and cheap and still living at home or could live at home, right? Because there are so many things that you could do to validate if you have the DNA to be a founder, right? Like you don't have to build this big business. You could start small and learn a skill and try to get somebody to buy into something you're doing, right? Whether it's getting people on a survey or an email list, and writing some content that you care about and having seeing if people subscribe. There are just so many low risk ways that you could experiment. And I have a friend who he was like the head of acquisition marketing for Living Social when they went through their explosion. He got his start and now he full time does mobile acquisition marketing and growth hacking. And that started well before he had the big job. But God, if you have any ideas that you may want to do it, just start messing around. It costs you nothing. There's so many tools, and they're mostly free. And you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So why not make them while you have a roof over and food, and you're not thinking about how do I feed my family?
Yeah, and just to add to that quickly, you also have to be real with yourself. Like if you're thinking about going full time and you're a junior, you're a senior, you have to think about what that actually means to you and how you can make that happen. I think when you're lying to yourself about something, or hopefully you do. And if you're not treating it seriously, you should not be going full time. It's going to be a waste of your time and everyone else's time. So I think that's another big thing. Like know what that means when when you graduate and you're taking your start at full time and the responsibility that has, because some people, just treat it like it's almost like a vacation, right? You don't have anyone telling you what to do. You can go hang out with friends in the middle of the day. You could play video games or something. Know what you're getting yourself into and treat it with the respect that it deserves.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Sarah.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and be as general because it's kind of specific, but one of my good friends started a tech company about 1.5 years ago, and for a while we had just kind of been in a lot of different sectors just trying to not lose money, and right now it's kind of hitting a point where it's growing and we need to prioritize what we're going to cut off so it actually can scale to a larger company. How would you guys advise what to how do we prioritize? Like what decisions and what questions do we need to ask? Like we're really struggling with the prioritizing while scaling. So if you guys have any advice regarding that, it would be great.
I can start. I think that's a really good question, and it's a hard question, but something that to think about when you're growing or scaling a business, no matter what size you are, is what are the short-term and the long-term benefits of each decision. So I think that there's actually needs to be a really good mix. You need to be at a place where one of your decisions in 3 months from now will pay off and let you keep growing. And you need to be in a place where 2 years from now, that long-term decision is going to play off, because then you'll buy more and more people into your vision. So that can be anything from, are you going to focus on 2 channels and heavily invest them to start promoting your business or product? Are you going to invest in hiring so people who maybe have done that before are going to tackle that for you? Or are you still trying to find your product market fit? And do you need to invest more in audience testing to really find that niche that you can address and that exact audience that can help take you organically? There are definitely a lot of resources on them online, but they're pretty confusing. So I feel like what you have to start with is, what are the things that are not working, and choose 1 or 2 things of those that you want to fix, and you just have to let the others go. And that is just a thing in a startup where you have to place your bet, and sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not, but it's way better to use that method I found than to try and tackle everything at once. So yeah, I'm sure that Ben and Matt also can really speak to this.
I mean, focus is super important, right? That an example I use all the time when I'm coaching teams is, if you have to put 20 families in homes, and you try to build 20 foundations, 20 elevations, 20 plumbing, wiring, everything, you have 20 families that are unhappy for a year and a half. Whereas if you can focus all your efforts on building one home a month, every single month you have another family that's happy. And that's the same thing about like focus and context switches, because our brains are really not good at multitasking. We think we can do it, but like a simple example would be count 1 through 10, do A to Z, now do 1A, 2B, 3C, and think how much harder it is to do that. Now imagine you're trying to split your brain across these very different business concepts. It's really hard to do. So I shared a link in the chat. It's a pretty popular framework called RICE, Reach, Impact, Confidence, and Effort. And it's, you know, one of the many iterations. It's one that I do happen to like around product, like what are we going to invest in? And, you know, reach is obviously how many people do you touch, impact, how much do you affect them in either their engagement with you, how much they're willing to share your product or service, talk about you, the, you know, confidence that you can do what you need to do in a certain time because you're running out of time, right? That's a finite commodity. And then the level of effort. And so when you plot it out in an XY axis, you want the most reach with the largest impact with the least amount of effort. So things that are like bottom and to the right on the kind of close to the x-axis are really bad because they require a lot of things to go right. Whereas things that are really up and to the left are pretty simple. And so it could be, you want to build as little as possible to validate that the things that you're doing may have resonance with customers, and do not be afraid to show your customers ugly products. Like I waited and I delayed my launch 2 or 3 times. And by the time it launched, it was a whimper. And I could have saved myself 6 months of like really difficult infrastructure building if I had just gone, what do you think of this? Right? Like there's a reason lean startup and MVPs, minimum viable products, have become so dominant, even in enterprises. So.
I'll also jump in, Sarah. First of all, congratulations, like so awesome. I do think it's a bit hard to answer your question without understanding your business in the context. So I think, first of all, to ask the question is like the first step, get help. I made a lot of mistakes because at the very early stage, I didn't consult a lot of people. And so I didn't know what not to do. And so I would encourage you, if you're not already in TIA, to join immediately. Are you in TIA?
No, it's technically my friend's company. I've just been helping out a lot and gotten pretty involved in it because I've been here the entire time since he's been working on it, and like suddenly it's becoming a thing. Like,
is he a Colgate student?
No, he's not.
Okay, well, you should join TIA and join the company and make it official, because it will be an amazing experience for you and the business, I'm sure. That's my recommendation. You don't have to do it, but I would highly recommend that. I can help you get set up. I mean, anyone here can help you get set up. And then reach out to some other people. I'm happy to be a resource as well. I'd love to learn more about exactly what you're doing so I can provide a better answer, but you're doing the right thing and thinking about these things and asking others about it. But I just feel like I can't provide a ton of info right now because I just don't understand the context.
Thank you, though. That's still really helpful.
Yeah, no problem. Keep going.
Other questions?
I have a question. Hi, my camera is not working at the moment, so sorry about that. I want to ask about the funding procedures. So, I mean, when you present to a VC or an angel investor, what could you advise that, and like what are some tips to deliver a successful pitch, in your opinion?
I can speak a little bit about that. I mean, I pitched quite a lot. I think the important things initially, well, there's different settings, right? So you could be pitching at like eFund, which is Colgate's, where you could be pitching at Colgate's Entrepreneurship Weekend, where it's like a whole event. You could be just pitching to a family member or someone you could be going and having a meeting with a VC. So it's there's definitely a lot of different experiences. I think the biggest thing is to start engaging in these fundraising conversations very, very early, ahead of time, and to position it not as, hi, is it Laksha? I'm not sure, but hi, I'm Matthew, and I'm looking to raise money for my business. But if you're early enough, you can say, hi, I'm Matthew. these are the challenges that I'm facing. This is what I'm doing. These are some of the problems I'm facing. I noticed you're in, X area and have had experience with this. Is there any way you would jump on a 30-minute call? I'd love to learn from you. And because you're a Colgate student, right, you're going to be, the answer is much more likely to be yes. They're going to start to get to know the business a lot better. They're going to help you, first of all, without providing any money, right? And then eventually you're going to see that by asking for advice, asking for money becomes much easier. In fact, maybe they may reach out to you and say, hey, Matthew, I know that you're raising, I know that you're building this company. Whenever you are looking to raise your first round, please make sure to include me. I'd love to be a part of it. So we could have a whole call about how to pitch. There's way too much to cover. But I think the most important thing initially is to start engaging in conversations with as many people as possible. Start a newsletter with monthly updates. Have like a quota for the amount of people you're going to speak to every week, or whether they're advisors, people in your space. Just start talking with people, not to raise money, but to get them introduced to your business and to build a relationship with them.
Makes sense. Okay.
I think there are very clear kind of divisions, right? You have the earliest is angel, right? They are people that just are willing to give you money because they think you're smart and they believe that you have the ability to solve a problem. Those checks tend to be fairly small, right? Like 10,000 to 200,000. And then when you start getting into seed rounds, usually seed rounds are at least $250,000. And in New York, seeds have gone to $2 to $6 million because the amount of due diligence required is significant. And so initially when I was trying to ask for 250, nobody was interested. Then I asked for 750, nobody was interested. They wanted me to start asking for larger and larger chunks because you have to understand the way that VCs make money. Once you're starting to see checks of 3, 6, 15, 20, 25, 100, they literally make money by making a lot of bets, and they need to know that the 0.1% or the 1/10 of a percent of the bets they make are paying for literally 900 losers. And so the way that they think about it is it's literally arbitrage, right? They have as many conversations without investing in competitive companies. Ideally, these companies are adjacent, so they already understand the space. But you have to understand what their responsibility is. They have a 4 to 7 year investment cycle. And every 4 to 7 years, they have to give money back to their investors. And so, a VC is going to look at a couple things. What is the total addressable market size? And then the next thing is, what percentage of the market can you capture? Do you understand some of the intermediate benchmarks? Have you shown any progress towards those benchmarks? So I remember once I asked for money with an investor I asked for $2.5 million at a $15 million valuation. And the guy said, I don't write checks for less than $10 million because it just takes me too much effort. And I'm only going to make 50 bets this year, right? So it's a little bit discouraging, but the more you can do to understand who are the people that make the kinds of investments you need, the less time you're going to waste. And there's a lot of things online, and every single VC has a site where they literally tell you, these are the types of companies I target. Software as a service, business to business. We specialize in geographies, right? Like you don't want to be pitching people in Silicon Valley if they say that they really are only interested in local founders in specific sectors. So like a little bit of prep work can save you a lot of time unless you go, let me just make some pitches and kind of learn all of the no's that I can here, because you're mostly going to hear no's.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to give one last chance for questions. Before we do that, I want to go over a few resources that are available for all of you as potential next steps. Career Services, Thought into Action, and the Colgate link. So to talk about career services really quickly, I'm going to introduce my colleague, James Reed, who's a career advisor.
Hey, folks. So not really too much detail to share here other than if you're interested in startups and entrepreneurship and are looking to learn a little bit more about the space and resources and things of that nature, feel free to connect with me or my colleague Laura Chrisley, who's always also on this session. A few of us in career services, our industry areas kind of overlap in some great ways. And in startups and entrepreneurship, there's a business side. There's a lot of Colgate students that I know that I've worked with and continue to work with interested in the tech side. And so we're here to do a little bit of legwork to understand these spaces, to connect with alumni in these spaces, and to help you develop an action plan to learn more and connect to pursue your goals. So you can connect with us for an advising appointment over the summer, at the start of the year, whenever is the best time for you. Right now, all you need to do is visit Career Services website, and there's a link there to schedule an advising appointment. So please feel free to do that. I recognize some of you on the call. It's good to see you all, and I look forward to talking with you more. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thanks, James. For anyone interested in Thought into Action, Matt has already done such a great job of plugging our program. There's really not much more that I need to say. I am the program director. If you're interested in learning more about TIA or applying to our incubator, it begins in September. It's an immersive 9-month experience in which you go through the experience of firsthand building your own venture. We are accepting applications for that right now. So if you want more information about how to apply or what the experience is like, please don't hesitate to reach out at all. We will follow up after this with an email to all of you with all of our contact information, some recommended resources and additional reading, those types of things. So you will have all of our contact information. And lastly, I would like to say that the Colgate link is the location where you can go to research, search for, and connect with Colgate alumni. I highly recommend all of you to get onto that resource, use it. It's a really great way. It's basically like LinkedIn, but just for the Colgate community. It allows you to reach out to alumni, to have informational interviews, talk to them, learn more about their careers and all of that. So again, we'll share some follow-up information about that, but that's a fantastic resource for all of you to have. So with that, I want to give one last opportunity. Any more outstanding questions that we can answer before we jump off the line?
One thing I forgot to mention, get really good at using Google. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. And, you know, part of being at a startup is when you hear something, like there's nothing greater than somebody says something in passing and you take it upon yourself to do some research. Or let's say you do a first interview, and in the first interview over the phone, there's some topic discussed. If you can go and bring something logical back to them, I mean, that already shows that you're walking a mile. And I always say to people, don't ask me stuff you can Google. Let's talk about stuff where it really requires some thought and some decision process.
That's true. I think that's advice any manager would give their direct reports as well. Perfect. Well, listen, thank you, Amulya, Matthew, and Ben, for taking the time to share your experience, share your thoughts with all of us. A big thank you to those of you who were able to join in today. This has been really great. And a big thanks to Chelsea for helping to coordinate this. So
Thank you all.
Have a great rest of the day, and we'll be following up with all of you.